Hi guys, welcome back. This is Carolyn. In today's tutorial video, I thought of doing something a little special since Mother's Day is just around the corner. And I'll be showing you how to paint this magnolia flower here. Since it's also spring now and magnolias are blooming everywhere, why not paint some magnolias? And in this tutorial, I've made it as simple as possible and beginner friendly as well, so that even if it's your first time painting, not to worry. I'll be showing you some techniques from the beginning, how to paint petals like this. And then once you're comfortable, you can then move on to painting this piece here. I've gotten this off a reference photo from, I think this is from Unsplash. And this is what the whole picture looks like, and I'll be using this flower for this, and then towards the up right, this one is for this flower here. So we'll be painting with similar colors like this, and let's dive in straight into the materials that we'll be using. Here you can see I have two different hues of red. First here we have Quinacridone Red, this one here, and this is from Shinhan. And then the second red that I've chosen is Alizarin Crimson from Winsor & Newton. So the reason why I chose to use two colors is because Quin Red has a more rosy pinkish hue, while Alizarin Crimson will give me the darker red hue that I need. Because if we look closely here, you can see most of the petals are pink, and then towards the darker tones, we have a bit of red going on. So to give it some variety and make it less boring, we will mix these two colors when painting the petals. And then here we have this darker shade here. I'll be mixing in burnt umber with a little bit of sepia, and we'll be using these two colors to glaze over to get this shadow darker hue. And then going into these buds here, we have some green buds and some leaves. So for this color, I'll be mixing two colors, phthalo green light and brown pink. And for the branches here, we'll be using sepia and a little bit of neutral tint. I don't have it with me here, but it's basically a dark blue grayish color. It will be a darker color compared to sepia, so I will use that to add in the darker shadows for the branches. And in terms of brushes, I have with me three sizes of brush. I have size 10, size 8 and size 6. So I'll be using these two brushes later, and I'll be showing you how we do it. And then the smaller brush here will be for filling in the details. And then here, the paper I'm using today is Arches cold press paper, 300 GSM, 100% cotton. For this technique that we'll be using, do get a good quality paper so that the results will turn out amazing. Before we get started in painting, let's do some practices. And I'll be showing you two techniques that we will be using in painting the magnolia petals. For the first technique, grab both your brushes. I'm using size 8 and size 10, or you can use both size 10 depending on how large your area is. So start off, I'll grab some colors here. And then lay it down. And then with this second brush in hand, with clean water, drag the color outwards, so that we have a smooth transition of colors. then the clean brush, drag out the colors like so. So we'll be using this when we are painting the petals. We'll have the darker shade down here, and then moving upwards, it will become like this. And then let's try with a petal. So start out with bottom, and then swap, and then pull the colors upwards. Like so. And if you feel that this area is not dark enough, as long as this layer is still wet, feel free to add on the saturation. And then blend off. Alright, and one thing to note, when darkening this area here, you can see that I am not putting my brush in my jar of water. I'm not washing anything off, but all I'm doing is just adding on more pigments to darken this area. The reason why I do not want to add water into my brush, because when that happens, we get a more watery mixture, and when that watery mixture is applied here, the water will react with this layer here and push out the pigments, and you get what they call blooms, like cauliflower. So if you'd like to know more about blooms and cauliflower and how to avoid them, I'll link it up in the cards above, or it will be available in the description below. Okay, so now this will be the first technique for the first layer of the petals. And then here we see that there are some darker areas for the shadow. I'll be using burnt umber and sepia for this color. So here I have a bit of mixture here, and what I'm going to do is just with my clean brush, I will wet this area here like so. Make sure that the first layer has completely dried before doing a second layer. And then grabbing some paints, I will drop it in like so. Then here you can see we have this nice transition from the shadows to the highlights. And if it's not dark enough, add more pigments. And then keep darkening as required. Okay, I'm going to dry this so that we can quicken the process. Okay, this is all dry, and again, with a clean brush, I'm going to wet the petal. And when you do so, be very gentle not to disturb the previous layer. And then I'll add a bit of the shadow here, like so. And then with the clean brush, I'll blend it off. And there you have this shadow of the petal. And if it's too brown, feel free to add in a bit more red. Like this. So you can keep playing around as long as the layer is still wet. And then after that, we're done. So these are the two steps that are required, or two layers that we apply when painting the petals. Okay, so practice this as much as possible until you feel comfortable before moving on to the actual piece. Alright, so let's dive into painting this magnolia. And I'd like to start off with this here, which is this flower over here. And let's start with this petal here, which is what we have just practiced. I'm going in and mixing both Alizarin Crimson with Queen Rose. And then I have my other clean brush on standby. And then let's start with the darkest area. And then bring it upwards. So you can see that it's pretty dark right up to here. So I'll bring it up here and then switching over, blend out the colors. And if you like to bring this up more, I'm going to add more red here. And then pull it up. So we have a bit of a curve here, so I'm just going to follow that. And then blend off the rest. So feel free to play around as long as this layer is still wet. And then blend it out like so. And I like to darken here a little bit more under the folded areas. Okay, and then with a clean brush, this time I will dry off my brush with lesser water. And then blend it out. And while this is drying, I do not want to paint the petal next to it. Let's move on to this one on top here. And then take note that this petal here is lighter than this red. So I'm going to add shade that is lighter than this. And then always starting from the bottom. We have darker around the right side. And then with this clean brush here, blend it out. Okay, and then moving on to our next petal, let's do this one here. And you can see that this is a lot lighter. And then blend it off with water. Oops. And looking at the hues, the shades, maybe I'll darken this a little bit more at the bottom. And then blend it out. Okay, this one is almost white, so I'm just going to lay in a very light shade of pink over it. I see that there's shadows on the upper left area here, so I'll just paint it here and then blend it out. And then let's do the other one here. So as you paint and move on from one petal to another, make sure to compare and check the values of the colors. Like here, we need it to be lighter than this one here. So always compare between the petals. And then I'll just bring it over here. Okay. Yes, I almost forgot because I have my pencil marks pretty dark, so let's just lighten them. And this one is dry. Let's keep moving. And we'll do this middle petal here. So I see more pinks going on here, so I'm going to add more pink. And then a bit of red on the side. And I'm leaving a white line between the two petals. And then now, instead of moving on to the clean brush, I'm going to add a bit of water into my brush. Give it a lighter shade and then pull it outwards. Because we have the pink still coming up pretty strong, so instead of using a totally clean brush, I'll just add more water into my brush to slow down the transition in the colors. And I see a little bit of yellow, so to make it interesting, I am going to add in a very tiny little bit of yellow into this area here. Give it a little bit of pop, just a little bit, and then blend it out. Let's move on to I think this is the last petal here, also a very light shade. And then let's do the same here. This is the folded petal, so just very, very light shade of pink. Okay, so we are done with this one. Let's move on to the second flower up here. And then immediately blend off. So always have this on standby so that it can immediately step in and blend off. Otherwise, it might get harsh edges forming. And I feel like I need to darken this a little more. And you can see that these two petals look like they are one petal. So to differentiate one petal from another, I'm going to darken just the borders. Okay, and let's do this one here. You can see that this one is pretty dark, so we'll be adding more shadows later for the second layer. And again, leave a bit of white space in between. And I'm seeing a bit more of purple going on here, mixing a bit of neutral tint. So we have a bit of purple here, and then bring it out, and then blend out. And then using my clean brush, I'm removing, lifting up some of the pigments to make this vein look more fine. And then dropping in a little bit more pigment. Darken it a little bit more, like that. Before we move on to the second layer, let's just dry this whole layer to make sure it's completely dry. Okay, and then using clean water, let's wet this area here. Careful not to disturb the bottom layer, just very gently. So we'll be adding the shadows mainly here, so make sure that this area is thoroughly wet. And then grabbing this brown, and then I'll drop it here, just a little bit. And then using a clean brush, now I'm using a size 6 brush, and blend off, just to give it a bit of that dimension. And then let's do a little bit here. Let's wet this area here. And then drop in just a tiny bit. blend it out. Okay, and I'm going to do a little bit here as well. Just like that. Okay, and then moving on to this petal here. Let's wet this area here. And then in with the brown. Okay, and a little bit here. Remember to always pre-wet before applying the shadows. And I think I missed out, we have one more petal here. Okay, and we are done for the petals and the shadows. And then now let's start working on the branches and the buds. And then now I will be mixing brown pink and a bit of light green. And we have this color here. And one thing to note when you're doing the pencil sketch, the way the shape of the petals fold and bend is really important because that determines the base foundation of how the whole flower will look. If you're not confident doing it freehand sketch, feel free to, sketch it off using a light box so you get it in the correct shape. And these ones here, they are a little bit green on the tip. And I will bring in a little bit brown at the bottom. And we can see here that the branch is a little bit purple, so I'm going to do that as well, so that I can bring some of the purple here onto the branch, to bring some of the colors over. So I'm going to use this purple here and then bring it down, connect from the top and bring it down here. And then going in with sepia. So I have a mixture of both purple and sepia going on here, just to help integrate the colors over. And then let's go in with sepia more. I'm going to darken the shadow areas a little bit here and there. As you can see, I have some of the purple from here, and it kind of shows like a bit of reflection from the color here onto the branch. So it helps to integrate the whole piece together. And you can see that I'm painting them in crooked lines. Some parts are curved, some parts are more crooked. And then going in with a darker shade, I'm going to drop in some darker pigments around here. So we have some areas that are darker. Okay, and then let's paint in this little bud here, and I'll be following this bud behind. And then now I'm going to add more depth into the branch, and grabbing a darker shade of sepia, I'm going to add it in around the bent areas. And then feel free to blend off so it doesn't look too harsh. Again, I'm using two brushes, one to apply the paints and one to blend it off. So we are done painting in all the petals. Now let's take a step back and see how this whole piece looks. And I feel like some parts still needs more work. So here I like to bring this purple over here. So I'm going to wet here a little bit and then bring in some purple. Just a tiny bit. And I'm going to add more to closen the white areas, make it smaller. Like that, and then blend it off. And I'll darken this area a little bit more. So we're using the same technique as we used for the first layer. Apply paints on this darker shaded area and then pull it out. So before completing the whole painting, this is what I'll usually do to look at where some areas needs more details, needs more darker colors, and by doing so it helps to create more contrast and depth in the whole painting. And here I feel it's a bit dull, so let's try this. I'm going to add more red on top. Can you see that? This is called the glazing technique, but basically it's the same as the first technique we used, but we're applying it on a layer that already has paint. So then by doing this, it brings the color to a different level. And any areas that looks very dull, feel free to use this glazing technique. This will help to bring some brightness into the petals. And I would say this step is optional. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, it's okay. Otherwise, feel free to experiment. And right now, I'm not looking at the reference picture anymore. I'm just looking at my painting as a whole. And just keep darkening areas around the shadow to give it a nice contrast. Especially here, it may look a bit flat, When you see two petals, they look like as if they blend into one. Can feel free again to darken this area here. You can see that by adding this shadow, I separated the two petals. So this is how the final piece looks. And I really like how the colors transition from a darker shade to a lighter shade. So I hope you enjoyed watching me paint. Please do give it a try if you're looking to make a Mother's Day card for your mom, or even just to practice your wet on wet techniques. I know it may look pretty intimidating at first, but please do not worry about that. As long as you practice the techniques that we did earlier, and then just apply it here. But don't fret if it didn't turn out well. It took me a few practices. I can guarantee you that the results will be amazing. So good luck painting and happy Mother's Day. I wish you all the best, stay safe, and I'll see you next week. Bye!